The dust in Parker Reed's eyes made them burn, but not as much as the grief that had hollowed out his chest for the past year. He stared across the yard of his ranch, the Bar R, watching as his 7-year-old daughter, Emma, half-heartedly tossed feed to the chickens. Her small shoulders drooped beneath the burden no child should bear growing up without her mother. Parker adjusted his hat, shielding his eyes from the harsh Montana sun of 1876, knowing he should call her in for lunch, but lacking the strength to pretend everything was normal for one more meal. Catherine had been gone for 14 months now. Consumption had taken her quickly, turning his vibrant, laughing wife into a shadow that slipped away in the night despite Doc Miller's best efforts. Parker had been left with a ranch to run, a child to raise, and a heart that felt like dry kindling, ready to crumble at the slightest touch. "Papa," Emma's voice cut through his thoughts. She was pointing toward the horizon, where a single rider approached along the dusty road that led to their property. Parker's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver on his hip. Visitors were rare this far out, 20 miles from the growing town of Riverspend. The figure drew closer, and he could make out a woman on horseback, her riding dress practical, her posture confident despite what must have been a long journey. "Stay behind me, Em," he said as his daughter scurried to his side. The rider slowed as she approached the fence line, and Parker felt his breath catch. There was something familiar about her, something that stirred memories from before his life on the ranch. "Parker Reed," the woman's voice carried across the yard. "It's been a long time." She pulled back her bonnet, revealing auburn hair and eyes the color of summer sage. Recognition hit him like a physical blow. "Charlotte Wilson," he managed, the name feeling strange on his tongue after so many years. Emma peeked from behind his legs. "Papa, who is she?" Charlotte dismounted with practiced ease, leading her chestnut mare toward them. "I'm an old friend of your mama's," she said directly to Emma, her voice gentle. "The best of friends once upon a time." Parker stood frozen. Charlotte Wilson had been Catherine's dearest childhood friend back in Illinois. They had grown up together, inseparable until Catherine's family moved west when the girls were 16. He remembered Catherine's letters to Charlotte during their courtship and for the first years of their marriage. But that had been over a decade ago. "What brings you all the way to Montana territory?" Parker found his voice at last, aware of how gruff he sounded. Charlotte's smile faded. "I received a letter from Catherine," she swallowed visibly. "It was delayed significantly. She wrote it before she passed. I came as soon as I read it." Emma stepped forward, her eyes wide. "You knew my mama." "I did, sweetheart." Charlotte knelt to Emma's level. "And you looked just like her when she was your age." Parker felt a twist of emotion, pain, resentment, and something dangerously close to hope. "Emma, take Miss Wilson's horse to the barn and give it some water," he said, needing a moment to collect himself. When Emma was out of earshot, leading the docile mare away, Parker turned to Charlotte. "What did Catherine's letter say?" Charlotte met his gaze steadily. "She knew she was dying, Parker. She asked me to come to help with Emma." Her voice softened. "She was worried about both of you." Parker felt his jaw tighten. "We've been managing, have you?" Charlotte glanced toward Emma, then back at him. "Because Catherine described a headstrong man who would work himself to death before asking for help. You've come a long way for nothing, then." Charlotte straightened her shoulders. "I promised my oldest friend I would look after her family. I intend to keep that promise, whether you like it or not." Parker wanted to argue to send this ghost from the past away before she could stir up more memories of Catherine. But Emma was already returning, her steps lighter than they'd been in months, and the words died in his throat. "You're welcome to stay the night," he said stiffly. "Town's a full day's ride from here." Charlotte nodded, understanding the grudging invitation for what it was. "Thank you, I'd appreciate that." Emma tugged at Charlotte's hand. "Do you want to see my room? Mama painted flowers on the walls." "I'd love to," Charlotte replied, allowing herself to be led toward the house. Parker watched them go, feeling like an intruder in his own life. Charlotte Wilson had always been a force of nature. Catherine had told stories of their adventures, their shared secrets, their bond that transcended distance. He'd never expected to face that force himself, especially not now, when he was barely holding his world together. As the evening shadows lengthened across the yard, Parker stood alone, wondering what Catherine had really written in that letter and why she had called her childhood friend to their doorstep after all these years. The small cabin felt crowded with Charlotte's presence. Parker sat stiffly at the dinner table, watching as she moved around his kitchen with an ease that felt like trespassing. Emma, however, had bloomed in the hours since Charlotte's arrival, chattering about her pony and her schoolwork in a way Parker hadn't heard in months. And then Billy Thompson said girls can't do arithmetic as good as boys, but I showed him I could, Emma declared, stabbing a potato with her fork. As well as boys, Charlotte corrected gently, and of course you can. Your mother was brilliant with numbers. She could calculate faster than any boy in our school. Parker felt a sharp pang at the casual mention of Catherine. Charlotte spoke of her as if she might walk through the door any moment, not as someone forever lost. I don't remember Mama doing arithmetic, Emma said, her voice small. Charlotte placed a hand over Emma's. She taught me how to keep accounts for my father's store. Without her, I'd never have been able to run it after he passed. Parker looked up, surprised. You run a store, Charlotte nodded. Wilson's General Goods in Springfield. It's been in my family for 3 generations. Her eyes held a hint of challenge. Women can run businesses just as well as men, Mr. Reed. Never said they couldn't, Parker replied, defensive despite himself. After dinner, once Emma was tucked into bed, Parker found Charlotte on the porch, staring at the star-filled Montana sky. He handed her a cup of coffee, which she accepted with a nod of thanks. She's a remarkable child, Charlotte said after a moment. Catherine's daughter through and through. Charlotte turned to study him. She has your stubbornness and your eyes. Parker leaned against the porch railing. Why did you really come, Charlotte? Catherine's been gone over a year. If her letter only just reached you, why make the journey now? Charlotte sipped her coffee before answering. The letter arrived 6 months ago. I had affairs to settle before I could leave. 6 months, Parker echoed. I sold the store, Charlotte continued, her voice matter of fact. Catherine's letter was specific. She didn't ask me to visit, Parker. She asked me to come and stay. Parker straightened. Stay for how long? As long as needed. Charlotte's gaze was unwavering. She knew Emma would need a woman's guidance, and she worried you would bury yourself in work until there was nothing left of the man she loved. Anger flared in Parker's chest. You don't know anything about me or my life here. I know Catherine loved you beyond reason, Charlotte replied, unfazed by his anger. I know she chose you over returning east, even when her parents pleaded with her. I know she wrote to me about your strength, your kindness, your dreams for this land. Parker turned away, unable to bear the weight of those words. That was a different man, a different time. Perhaps. Charlotte set down her cup, but Emma doesn't need a shell of a father. She needs the man Catherine believed in. And you think you can bring him back, Parker scoffed. By all means, work your miracle, Miss Wilson. Charlotte's expression softened. Not a miracle, Mr. Reed, just time and care, the same thing any wounded creature needs to heal. Parker wanted to lash out, to tell her to take her presumptions and leave in the morning. But Emma's laughter from earlier echoed in his mind, the first real laughter he'd heard from his daughter in too long. 1 week, he said finally. You can stay 1 week, then we'll discuss what happens next. Charlotte nodded, accepting his terms without argument. Good night, Parker. As she disappeared into the house, Parker remained on the porch, the vast Montana night surrounding him. Catherine had always believed in signs and fate. He wondered if she was somewhere now, pulling strings to bring Charlotte Wilson into their broken lives. The thought should have comforted him, but instead it left him feeling exposed, as if Catherine had seen through his facade of coping all along. 1 week, he told himself. He could tolerate anything for 1 week. Morning came with the sound of laughter from the kitchen. Parker had been up since dawn, checking the fences on the north pasture, his muscles aching from the work he'd thrown himself into to avoid thinking about his houseguest. When he entered through the back door, he found Emma seated at the table, flour dusting her cheeks, while Charlotte showed her how to roll out dough. Papa, look, we're making biscuits like Mama used to. Emma's eyes shone with excitement. Parker forced a smile. That's wonderful, Em. He glanced at Charlotte, who was wiping her hands on a towel. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to, Charlotte replied simply. Besides, every child should know how to make their mother's recipes. Parker hung his hat on the peg by the door. I need to head into town today for supplies. I was going to take Emma, but we'll be fine here, Charlotte assured him. Unless you'd prefer I go with you, the thought of spending hours in a wagon with Charlotte, fielding curious looks and questions from townsfolk, made Parker's stomach clench. No, you two stay. I'll be back before sundown. Relief crossed Emma's face, and Parker realized with a pang that she dreaded the long, silent rides to town as much as he did. Could you mail a letter for me? Charlotte asked. I need to let my cousin know I've arrived safely. Of course. As Parker hitched the wagon, he watched through the window as Charlotte and Emma continued their baking lesson. There was an easy comfort between them that both soothed and troubled him. He couldn't deny that Emma needed this a woman's presence, stories of her mother, gentle guidance that he struggled to provide. But the speed with which Charlotte had slipped into their lives left him off balance. The ride to Riverspend gave him time to think. Parker had met Catherine in this very town when it was barely more than a cluster of buildings. She had come west with her parents, who opened the town's first proper hotel. Parker, newly arrived from Texas with dreams of his own ranch, had taken one look at Catherine Graham serving coffee in her father's establishment and fallen hopelessly in love. Their courtship had been swift, their marriage happy. Catherine had embraced ranch life with determination, learning to garden in the harsh climate, to preserve food for winter, to birth calves and break horses. She had given him Emma and filled their home with warmth Parker had never known in his own childhood. When the cough started, they'd both dismissed it as a cold. By the time they recognized the truth, it was too late. The consumption worked quickly, robbing Catherine of her strength, her breath, and finally, her life. Parker pulled the wagon up to Wilson's Mercantile, nodding to the owner, George Wilson, who had no relation to Charlotte despite the shared surname. Morning, Parker, George called. Heard you got yourself a visitor out at the bar R. News traveled fast in Riverspend. Parker wasn't surprised that Charlotte's arrival was already common knowledge. Old friend of Catherine's, he said tersely, unwilling to elaborate. George seemed to sense his mood. Got your usual order ready. Anything else you need? Parker hesitated. Some tea maybe, and sugar. And whatever fabric you have that might be suitable for a woman's dress. George's eyebrows rose, but he asked no questions as he gathered the additional items. Parker felt foolish, but he realized Charlotte had arrived with only a small traveling trunk. If she was staying a week or longer, she would need more than what she'd brought. As he loaded his supplies, Sheriff James Harmon approached, his weathered face serious beneath his hat. Reed, he greeted. Might want to keep an eye out. Daniel's gang was spotted near Carson's Creek. They've been hitting isolated homesteads. Parker nodded, his thoughts immediately going to Emma and Charlotte alone at the ranch. Appreciate the warning, I'll head back now. The ride home was faster, Parker pushing the horses harder than usual. The Daniels gang was notorious in the territory Three Brothers, and a collection of outlaws who robbed, burned, and occasionally killed without remorse. They usually stayed farther north, but if they were moving into this area. As the Bar R came into view, Parker felt relief wash over him. Everything looked peaceful, smoke rising from the chimney, chickens scratching in the yard. He hadn't realized how tense he'd been until that moment. He found Charlotte and Emma in the garden behind the house, working together to pull weeds from between rows of vegetables that had been sadly neglected. This garden was Catherine's pride, Charlotte was saying. She wrote to me about how she'd finally managed to grow tomatoes after 3 failed seasons. Emma nodded. She used to let me pick the peas. I'd eat more than I put in the basket. They looked up as Parker approached. Emma ran to him, her hands dirty but her face brighter than it had been in months. Charlotte knows all about gardens. She says we can save Mama's plants. Parker lifted Emma into a hug, surprising himself with the gesture. That's wonderful, Em. Over her head, he caught Charlotte's eye. There's trouble brewing. The Daniels gang has been spotted nearby. Charlotte's expression turned serious. I've heard of them, even in Illinois. Parker set Emma down. Go wash up, sweetheart. I brought some sugar. Maybe you and Charlotte can make something sweet later. When Emma was out of earshot, Parker lowered his voice. If they come, you take Emma and hide in the root cellar. There's a shotgun in the kitchen behind the flour barrel. Charlotte's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. I know how to use a gun, Parker. My father taught me. Good. He hadn't expected that, but he was relieved. I brought some things from town for you, fabric, some personal items. I realized you traveled light. Surprise flickered across Charlotte's face, followed by something softer. That was thoughtful, thank you. Parker shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Least I could do if you're helping with Emma and the house. I didn't come to be your housekeeper, Charlotte said, but her tone was gentle. I came because Catherine asked me to help her family heal. Parker didn't know how to respond to that. Healing wasn't something he'd allowed himself to consider. Surviving day to day had been challenge enough. I need to unload the wagon, he said, retreating to the familiar territory of chores and responsibilities. As he worked, he found himself watching Charlotte and Emma returning to their garden task, their heads bent together in conversation. Charlotte moved with a quiet confidence, her hands capable, her laugh genuine when Emma said something amusing. There was something both familiar and entirely new about her presence on his land, like finding a perfectly fitting piece to a puzzle he hadn't known was incomplete. The thought unsettled him more than the threat of outlaws. The week Parker had grudgingly granted Charlotte stretched into 2, then 3. Each morning he woke expecting to feel the same resentment at her presence, but instead found himself listening for her voice, for Emma's laughter, for the sounds of life returning to his home. Charlotte had transformed the neglected garden, restored order to the house without erasing Catherine's touches, and most importantly, brought Emma out of her shell of grief. The girl who had moved through her days like a ghost now ran and played, told stories, and sometimes even sang songs that Charlotte had taught her, songs that Catherine used to sing in their Illinois childhood. It was a warm afternoon in late June when Parker returned from checking on a pregnant heifer to find Charlotte at the clothesline, hanging freshly washed sheets. She had tied her auburn hair back with a ribbon, and the sleeves of her dress were rolled up to reveal slender forearms tanned by the Montana sun. She looked like she belonged there, like she had always been part of this landscape. Need help, he called, surprising himself with the offer. Charlotte turned, shading her eyes against the sun. I wouldn't turn it down. These sheets are unwieldy. Together they worked in companionable silence, securing the large white sheets against the breeze. Parker found himself noticing things he'd been trying to ignore: the graceful way Charlotte moved, the tiny freckles across the bridge of her nose, the strand of hair that escaped her ribbon. Emma's down for a nap, Charlotte said as they finished. She helped me scrub floors this morning and wore herself out. Parker smiled. You've been good for her. She's a remarkable child. You and Catherine raised her well. Catherine did most of the raising, Parker admitted. I was always too busy with the ranch. Charlotte picked up the empty laundry basket. Don't underestimate your importance in her life, Parker. Emma treasures every moment you spend with her. The observation hit closer to home than Parker was comfortable with. I haven't been much of a father this past year. Grief takes different paths for everyone, Charlotte said. Catherine would understand. Parker looked toward the distant mountains. What did she really say in that letter, Charlotte? The whole truth? Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. She knew she was dying. She wrote that she couldn't bear the thought of you and Emma facing life alone, drowning in grief. She met his gaze directly. She remembered how I helped her after her father died when we were 14. She said I brought her back to life then, and she hoped I might do the same for her family. And you gave up your store, your life in Illinois, on the strength of that request. Parker couldn't fathom such loyalty. Catherine was more than a friend to me, Charlotte said simply. She was the sister I never had, and there was nothing left for me in Springfield. No family, no husband, no children. A shadow crossed her face. My fiancé died in the war. Since then, it's just been me and the store. Parker hadn't known she'd lost someone too. It explained something about the depth in her eyes, the understanding he sometimes caught there when he was at his lowest. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it. Charlotte smiled faintly. Life continues whether we want it to or not. Catherine understood that better than anyone. Before Parker could respond, the sound of approaching riders reached them. His hand moved instinctively to his hip, but he'd left his gun in the house. Get inside, he said to Charlotte. Wake Emma and take her to the root cellar. Charlotte didn't argue, hurrying toward the house as Parker moved to the front yard. 4 riders approached, dust rising behind them. As they drew closer, Parker's stomach nodded with recognition. 3 of them shared the same heavy brow and dark hair, the Daniels brothers. The 4th was a wiry man with a pockmarked face whom Parker didn't recognize. They pulled up in front of the house, spreading out in a way that left Parker exposed. Afternoon, the oldest brother, Elias Daniels, called. His voice was deceptively friendly. Fine place you got here, mister. Parker kept his stance relaxed, though every nerve was screaming danger. Can I help you, gentlemen? Hope so, Elias replied. We're mighty thirsty, thought you might offer some hospitality to weary travelers. Water trough for the horses is over there, Parker said, nodding toward the corral. I can fetch you men some water too, the youngest brother snickered. Heard you got more than water to offer, heard you got a pretty lady staying here. Ice formed in Parker's veins. Someone in town had been talking too much. My daughter's tutor, he said flatly. Nothing that would interest you. Now that ain't neighborly, Elias said, his smile fading. We just want to say hello, maybe get a decent meal, been a while since we had a woman's cooking. Parker held his ground. My hospitality doesn't extend that far. Water's all I can offer, then I'd appreciate you moving on. The brothers exchanged looks. The middle one, Lucas, shifted in his saddle, revealing the rifle strapped there. We don't take kindly to rudeness, Elias said. The tension was broken by the sound of the cabin door opening. Charlotte stepped onto the porch, a shotgun held confidently in her hands. Neither do we, she said clearly, and trespassing is particularly rude. Parker wanted to curse her for not staying hidden, but he had to admire her courage. She held the shotgun like she knew how to use it, and her expression was resolute. Elias's eyes narrowed. Well, ain't you a spirited one? You have 10 seconds to turn around and leave this property, Charlotte continued, or I start shooting. I'm particular about where I aim first. Her gaze dropped meaningfully to Elias's lap. The pockmarked man laughed nervously. Come on, Elias, we don't need trouble. Elias glared at Charlotte, then at Parker. Another time, then. He turned his horse. Let's go, boys. They rode off slowly, too slowly for Parker's comfort. When they were finally out of sight, he strode to the porch. What were you thinking? He demanded. I told you to hide with Emma. Charlotte lowered the shotgun. Emma is safe. I locked her in the root cellar as you asked, but I wasn't about to hide while you faced 4 armed men alone. You could have been hurt, or worse. So could you, Charlotte countered. Catherine didn't ask me to come here so I could watch you get yourself killed. The mention of Catherine deflated Parker's anger. They'll be back. Men like that don't take kindly to being threatened, especially by a woman. Charlotte nodded grimly. Then we'd better be prepared. Parker studied her, seeing her in a new light. She wasn't just the refined shopkeeper he'd imagined, nor simply Catherine's gentle childhood friend. There was steel in Charlotte Wilson, the same kind of strength Catherine had possessed, but with its own distinct character. We should get into town, warn the sheriff, Parker said. Pack what you need for a few days, Emma too. Running away won't solve the problem, Charlotte argued. It's not running, it's being smart. Those men are killers, Charlotte. Charlotte considered this, then nodded. All right, but we'll need to come back. This is your home, Emma's home. Our home, Parker said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Charlotte's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't comment on his choice of words. I'll get Emma and pack our things. As she disappeared into the house, Parker looked out across his land, the land he and Catherine had worked so hard to build into something lasting. He'd be damned if he'd let the Daniels gang take it from him, from Emma, from Charlotte. The thought of Charlotte as part of what needed protecting should have alarmed him, but instead, it felt right in a way few things had since Catherine's death. Riverspend had grown since Parker first arrived 15 years earlier. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted a proper main street with a hotel, general store, saloon, and even a small schoolhouse. Sheriff Harmon's office sat at the edge of town, a sturdy building with a two-cell jail attached. Parker guided the wagon to a stop in front of the sheriff's office, his rifle across his knees. Charlotte sat beside him, Emma between them, her small body tense with the urgency of their departure. "Wait here," Parker said, handing the reins to Charlotte. Inside, he found Sheriff Harmon cleaning his revolver. The older man looked up, his expression turning serious as Parker recounted the confrontation with the Daniels gang. "They're getting bolder," Harmon said, shaking his head. "Used to stick to freight wagons and mining camps. Now they're hitting farms and ranches." "They'll be back," Parker said. "I need a safe place for my daughter and Miss Wilson." Harmon nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Thornton at the boarding house has rooms, as for the Daniels boys." He checked his gun and holstered it. "I've been gathering men, Marshall from Helena's sending deputies. We aim to end this threat once and for all." "Count me in," Parker said without hesitation. "Figured as much." Harmon stood. "Meeting tomorrow at dawn. For now, get your family settled." Family, the word echoed in Parker's mind as he returned to the wagon. Emma wasn't the only one who looked tense now. Charlotte's face was drawn with worry. "Mrs. Thornton's boarding house has room for you and Emma," he told her as he climbed up. "I'll be joining the sheriff and some other men to deal with the Daniels gang." Charlotte's fingers tightened on the reins. "That's your plan, to ride out like some avenging posse. It's not just for us," Parker explained as he took the reins back. "They've been terrorizing the whole territory. It's time someone stopped them. And if you're killed," Charlotte's voice was low, mindful of Emma. "What happens to Emma then?" The question hit Parker like a physical blow. It was the same question Catherine had asked before she died, her eyes desperate with fear for their daughter's future. "I won't be," he said, though he knew it was a promise he couldn't guarantee. They rode in tense silence to the boarding house, a neat two-story building with a wide porch and window boxes full of flowers. Mrs. Thornton, a stout widow with a kind face, welcomed them warmly, showing special attention to Emma. "Such a lovely child," she said, patting Emma's head. "Just like her mother was. Catherine used to help me with the mending whenever she came to town." As Mrs. Thornton led Emma upstairs to see their rooms, Charlotte turned to Parker. "I know I can't stop you from joining this posse," she said quietly, "but please remember what's at stake. Emma has already lost her mother." Parker looked down at Charlotte, struck again by the concern in her eyes, concern not just for Emma, but for him. "I'll be careful," he promised. "But I can't let those men threaten my home. Our home," he amended, watching her reaction. A faint color rose in Charlotte's cheeks. "Just come back," she said simply. Parker hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. Her fingers were warm against his, and the contact sent an unexpected current through him. "I will." The moment was interrupted by Emma's return, chattering about the room with its lace curtains and patchwork quilts. Parker knelt to her level. "I have to go help the sheriff with something important," he told her. "You'll stay here with Charlotte for a few days." Emma's face fell. "You're leaving again?" The naked hurt in her voice made Parker wince. Had he been so absent that his daughter expected abandonment? Not for long, he assured her. "And when I come back, we'll go home and everything will be better. I promise." Emma regarded him solemnly. "Mama promised she'd get better too." Parker felt the words like a knife to his heart. "Oh, Emma threw her arms around his neck. "Please don't die like Mama did." Over Emma's shoulder, Parker met Charlotte's gaze. Her eyes held the same fear as his daughter's, though she tried to mask it. "I won't," he whispered, holding Emma tightly. "I'll come back to you, to both of you." After settling Emma and Charlotte at the boarding house, Parker spent the night at the livery stable, too restless to sleep properly. At dawn, he joined 15 other men in front of the sheriff's office. They were a determined group: ranchers, shopkeepers, farmers, ordinary men pushed to their limit by the Daniels gang's reign of terror. Sheriff Harmon laid out the plan. A traveler had spotted the gang's camp near Widow's Creek, about 4 hours' ride from town. They would approach from different directions, surrounding the outlaws. "These men won't hesitate to shoot," Harmon warned. "Neither can we, but I want them alive if possible. They deserve to hang properly for their crimes." The men nodded grimly, checking their weapons one final time before mounting up. As Parker swung into his saddle, he caught sight of a figure standing at the edge of the boarding house porch. Charlotte watched him, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders in the early morning chill. He raised his hand in farewell, and she returned the gesture, her face solemn. The posse rode out as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, casting long shadows across the land. Parker found himself riding alongside George Wilson from the Mercantile. "Never thought I'd see Charlotte Wilson in these parts," George commented after they'd been riding for an hour. "Heard she was quite the businesswoman back east," Parker grunted noncommittally. "Catherine's friend, wasn't she?" George continued, undeterred by Parker's reticence. "Seems to have taken a shine to your girl, and to you, if you don't mind my saying." Parker shot him a sharp look. "What's that supposed to mean?" George shrugged. "Just an observation. Woman doesn't travel halfway across the country and give up her livelihood unless there's something or someone mighty important waiting." "She came because Catherine asked her to," Parker said stiffly. "Sure," George agreed easily, "but she's staying for more than that, I'd wager." Parker didn't reply, but George's words lingered. Was Charlotte staying out of obligation to Catherine's memory, or was there more to it? And what about his own feelings? The comfort he took in her presence, the way he found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, the strange ache he felt at the thought of her eventually leaving, were these betrayals of Catherine, or something his late wife had somehow foreseen? His thoughts were interrupted as Sheriff Harmon raised his hand, signaling the men to halt. They had reached the wooded area around Widow's Creek. Smoke from a campfire rose lazily above the trees. "We split up here," Harmon said in a low voice. "Groups of 4 approach from all sides." "Wait for my signal." Parker found himself with George, a rancher named Dawson, and a young deputy. They circled wide, approaching the camp from the west. Through the trees, Parker could make out 5 figures, the Daniels brothers, the pockmarked man from before, and a new face. They were arguing about something, voices raised despite the risk of being overheard. Parker strained to catch their words. "Told you it was stupid to go to that ranch," the pockmarked man was saying. "Now the whole territory's up in arms. Shut your mouth, Hawkins," Elias Daniels snapped. "One more night, then we hit the bank in Riversbend and head for Canada." Parker exchanged glances with his companions. The bank job explained why the gang had moved into this area. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Sheriff Harmon's signal. Immediately, the outlaws reached for their weapons. "Drop your guns," Harmon shouted from his position. "You're surrounded." What followed was chaos. The Daniels gang didn't surrender, firing wildly into the trees. Parker and the others returned fire, trying to provide cover as Harmon and several men charged the camp. Parker saw the youngest Daniels brother aiming at the deputy beside him. Without thinking, he threw himself forward, tackling the young man to the ground as a bullet whistled overhead. They rolled in the dirt, struggling for position. A gunshot rang out close by, and Parker felt a searing pain across his upper arm. He managed to land a solid punch, knocking his opponent unconscious, before pressing a hand to his bleeding arm. The firefight was over almost as quickly as it had begun. The pockmarked man, Hawkins, lay dead. Lucas Daniels was wounded but alive, and the other 3, including Elias, were in custody. "You're hit," George said, kneeling beside Parker. "Just a graze," Parker replied, though the pain suggested otherwise. Sheriff Harmon approached, satisfaction evident beneath his concern. "That was a foolish but brave thing you did, Reed. Saved Simmons' life." Parker nodded, grimacing as George tied a bandana around his wounded arm. "We got them all accounted for," Harmon confirmed. "Let's get you back to town and have Doc Miller look at that arm." The ride back to Riversbend was triumphant despite Parker's injury. Word of their success had somehow preceded them, and people lined the main street, cheering as the posse rode in with their prisoners. Parker scanned the crowd, his heart leaping when he spotted Charlotte and Emma standing outside the boarding house. Emma broke away, running toward him despite Charlotte's attempt to hold her back. "Papa," she cried as Parker dismounted awkwardly, favoring his injured arm. He caught her with his good arm, lifting her despite the pain. "I'm all right, Em, just a scratch," Charlotte reached them, her face pale with worry as she took in the blood-stained bandana. "This is more than a scratch, Parker Reed." "Nothing Doc Miller can't fix," he assured her. Though the world had begun to tilt alarmingly, Charlotte slipped under his uninjured arm, supporting him. "Emma, run ahead and tell Doc we're coming." Parker wanted to protest that he could walk on his own, but the warmth of Charlotte against his side felt too necessary to reject. Together they made their way to the doctor's small office, where Miller was already preparing his instruments. "Bullet still in there?" the doctor asked briskly. "Don't think so," Parker managed. "Went through." "Lucky man," Miller commented, cutting away Parker's shirt sleeve. "Though lucky might be stretching it. This is a nasty wound." Charlotte hovered nearby as the doctor cleaned and stitched the injury, her hands clasped tightly together. Emma had been sent to wait in the outer room after one look at the blood made her pale. "He'll be fine," Miller told Charlotte as he finished bandaging Parker's arm. "Keep the wound clean, change the bandage daily. No heavy lifting for at least 2 weeks." 2 weeks, Parker protested. "I have a ranch to run." "You have a daughter who needs her father alive," Miller countered. "And from what I hear, you have help now." He glanced meaningfully at Charlotte. Parker subsided, too exhausted to argue further. The laudanum Miller had given him for the pain was making his thoughts fuzzy. "I'll make sure he follows orders," Charlotte promised the doctor. "I'm sure you will, Miss Wilson," Miller replied with a knowing smile that Parker was too drowsy to interpret. Charlotte helped Parker back to the boarding house, where Mrs. Thornton had prepared a room for him. Emma trailed anxiously behind them, her small face serious. "You promised you wouldn't get hurt," she accused as Charlotte helped Parker onto the bed. "I promised I'd come back," Parker corrected gently. "And I did." Emma considered this, then nodded, apparently satisfied with his logic. "Charlotte was scared you wouldn't." Parker's eyes moved to Charlotte, who was arranging pillows behind his head, her cheeks flushed at Emma's words. "I was concerned," she corrected. "For Emma's sake." "Of course," Parker murmured, the laudanum making him bolder than usual. "For Emma's sake." Charlotte straightened, smoothing her skirts in a gesture he now recognized as nervousness. "You should rest. Emma and I will bring you some dinner later." As she ushered Emma from the room, Parker caught her hand. "Thank you, Charlotte." She looked down at their joined hands, then met his gaze with an intensity that pierced through his drugged haze. "Just don't make a habit of getting shot, Parker Reed." He smiled drowsily. "Yes, madam." The week in town stretched into 2 as Parker's wound healed. The Daniels brothers and their remaining accomplice were transported to Helena for trial. Their reign of terror finally ended. Life in Riverspend returned to normal, though Parker found himself in no hurry to return to the isolation of the ranch. Each day, Charlotte and Emma would visit him in his room, bringing food, books, and conversation. As his strength returned, they would take walks through town, the 3 of them together drawing curious but approving glances from the townsfolk. It was during one such walk, with Emma running ahead to look at a display in the mercantile window, that Parker finally voiced the question that had been on his mind. "What happens when I'm fully healed, Charlotte?" She glanced at him, her expression carefully neutral. "We return to the ranch, I suppose. And after that, will you go back to Illinois?" Charlotte was quiet for several steps. "I sold my store, Parker. There's nothing for me in Springfield now." Hope flared in Parker's chest, but he tamped it down. "What about here? What's here for you?" Charlotte stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Are you asking me to leave?" "No," Parker said quickly. "God, no, I'm asking if you want to stay." "With you and Emma," Parker nodded, unable to find the words for what he really wanted to ask. Was it too soon? Would it be a betrayal of Catherine? The questions had plagued him through sleepless nights in the boarding house. Charlotte seemed to understand his struggle. She reached out, her fingers brushing his uninjured arm. "Catherine wrote something else in her letter," she said softly. "Something I haven't told you." Parker held his breath, waiting. "She said that if I helped you and Emma heal, I might find healing too." Charlotte's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She wrote that we were the 2 people she loved most in the world, and that nothing would make her happier than knowing we had found comfort in each other." Parker felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "She wrote that?" Charlotte nodded. Catherine knew me better than anyone. She knew I've been alone too long, just as she feared you would be. She took a deep breath. But Parker, I didn't stay because Catherine asked me to. I stayed because I came to care for Emma and for you. The confession hung between them, fragile and momentous. Parker looked past Charlotte to where Emma was now chatting animatedly with the mercantile owner's wife. His daughter was smiling, alive in a way she hadn't been since Catherine's death. He thought of the ranch, how it had begun to feel like a home again with Charlotte there, rather than a monument to what he had lost. I want you to stay, he said finally, meeting Charlotte's gaze. Not as Catherine's friend or as Emma's teacher, but as. He hesitated, searching for the right words. As part of our family, however that might look. Charlotte's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. I'd like that very much. Before Parker could respond, Emma came running back to them. Can we go home tomorrow? I want to see if the tomatoes are ripe yet. Parker looked at Charlotte, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, he told Emma, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Tomorrow we'll go home. The bar R looked different somehow as they approached it the following afternoon. The summer sun gilded the cabin's weathered logs, the garden's green abundance, the grazing cattle in the distance. To Parker, it looked like a painting of what a home should be, rather than the hollow shell it had become after Catherine's death. I worried the garden would be ruined, Charlotte said as they pulled the wagon into the yard. But it looks like the rain we had was just what it needed. Emma jumped down almost before the wagon stopped, running to check on her chicken flock. Parker watched her go, then turned to help Charlotte down, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary. Thank you, he said simply. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. For what? For coming, for staying, for bringing life back to this place, to us. A blush colored Charlotte's cheeks. You make it sound like I performed some kind of miracle, didn't you? Parker asked, half serious. Charlotte shook her head. The strength was always in you and Emma, you just needed someone to remind you of it. She glanced toward the small, fenced cemetery on the hill behind the house where Catherine rested. She knew that. Parker followed her gaze. For the first time in over a year, he could look toward Catherine's grave without feeling that crushing weight of grief. The pain was still there, would always be there, but it had transformed into something he could carry without being broken by it. I'd like to visit her, Charlotte said softly. If that's all right, Parker nodded. I think she'd like that. While Emma busied herself with the chickens, Parker watched as Charlotte made her way up the gentle slope to the cemetery. She carried a small bunch of wildflowers she'd gathered along the road. Through the late afternoon light, he saw her kneel beside the simple wooden cross, arranging the flowers, her lips moving in what might have been prayer or conversation. Something settled in Parker's heart as he watched not closure exactly, but a sense of rightness. Catherine had known what she was doing when she wrote to Charlotte. She had seen a way forward for all of them, even when Parker could see nothing beyond his grief. When Charlotte returned, her eyes were damp but her expression peaceful. She would be proud of you, she told Parker. Of how you've raised Emma, of how you've held on through everything. Parker took her hand, drawing her closer. She would be glad you're here. Charlotte's free hand came up to rest against his chest, over his heart. I'm glad too. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Parker found himself leaning down, drawn by something stronger than thought. Charlotte's eyes fluttered closed as his lips met hers in a kiss that felt both like an ending and a beginning, gentle, tentative, but filled with promise. They broke apart at the sound of Emma's approaching footsteps. The girl slowed as she saw them, her eyes wide with surprise, then understanding beyond her years. Are you going to be my new mama? She asked Charlotte directly. Charlotte looked to Parker, who found himself nodding almost imperceptibly. Would you like that, Emma? Charlotte asked carefully. Emma considered the question with the seriousness only a child can bring to life's biggest matters. Mama said in heaven we can see everything. Do you think she can see us now? Parker knelt to his daughter's level. I think she can, Em. Then she can see that we're happy again, Emma reasoned. And she'd be happy too, right? Yes, Charlotte said, joining them. Your mother wanted nothing more than for you and your father to be happy. Emma nodded, satisfied. Then it's okay if you stay and be my new mama, but I'll still remember my first mama too. Of course you will, Charlotte assured her, drawing Emma into a hug. We'll remember her together. Over Emma's head, Charlotte's eyes met Parker's, filled with a love that both honored the past and embraced the future. Parker joined the embrace, his arms encircling them both, his family made whole again in a way he had never thought possible. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Parker and Charlotte sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Montana sky. Charlotte's head rested against Parker's shoulder, her hand in his. "I want to do this properly," Parker said into the comfortable silence. "Court you, I mean, if you'll have me," Charlotte laughed softly. "I gave up my store and traveled 2,000 miles to be here." "I think we're beyond the conventional courtship stage," Parker smiled, acknowledging the truth of her words. "Then marry me, Charlotte Wilson. Be Emma's mother, my wife, the heart of this home." Charlotte turned to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Are you certain, Parker?" "It's only been too long," he interrupted gently. "Too long since this house felt like a home, too long since Emma had a mother's love, too long since I allowed myself to look forward instead of back." He touched her cheek. "Catherine sent you to us because she knew what we would come to mean to each other. I don't want to waste any more time." Charlotte's answer was to kiss him, a kiss deeper and more certain than their first. When they parted, her smile held all the promise of tomorrow. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." 2 months later, on a perfect autumn day with leaves turning gold on the cottonwoods, Parker and Charlotte were married in the Riversbend church. Emma stood beside them, holding a bouquet of late blooming wildflowers from Catherine's garden, her face radiant with joy. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which spilled from the church into the street and eventually to the hotel dining room. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, a community coming together to celebrate new beginnings. As Parker danced with his bride, he caught sight of Emma being twirled by Sheriff Harmon, her laughter ringing above the music. The sound struck him anew each time he heard it, the miracle of his daughter's resilience, her capacity for joy even after loss. "She's thriving," Charlotte murmured, following his gaze. "Because of you," Parker replied, drawing her closer. Charlotte shook her head. "Because she's Catherine's daughter and yours, that strength was always in her." Parker pressed his lips to Charlotte's forehead. "Thank you for helping us find it again." Later, as they prepared to leave the celebration, Emma tugged at Charlotte's dress. "Can we visit Mama's grave tomorrow? I want to tell her about the wedding." Charlotte knelt, straightening Emma's slightly rumpled dress. "Of course we can, sweetheart." Parker watched them, his heart full to bursting. The grief that had nearly destroyed him had somehow led to this new happiness, not replacing what was lost, but growing alongside it, creating a tapestry richer and more complex than he could have imagined. As they rode home to the Bar R under a canopy of stars, Emma dozing between them in the wagon, Parker felt Catherine's presence not as a ghost, but as a blessing. She had loved them enough to ensure they wouldn't be lost without her, had somehow orchestrated this healing from beyond the grave. "What are you thinking?" Charlotte asked softly, careful not to wake Emma. Parker reached across to take her hand. "That Catherine would be pleased with how her plan worked out," Charlotte smiled, her new wedding ring catching the moonlight. "She always was the clever one." "She chose well," Parker said, meaning far more than Charlotte's arrival in their lives. As the ranch came into view, its windows warm with lamplight left burning by Mrs. Thornton, who had prepared the house for their return, Parker felt a profound sense of completion. The Bar R was truly home again, a place of love and life, of memories honored and new ones waiting to be made. Emma stirred between them. "Are we home?" she asked sleepily. "Yes, Em," Parker answered, his eyes meeting Charlotte's over their daughter's head. "We're home." Spring came to Montana with its usual fickleness, days of sunshine and warmth, followed by sudden snowstorms that reminded everyone that winter wasn't quite finished. At the Bar R, new life appeared everywhere. Calves in the pastures, chicks in the henhouse, green shoots in Charlotte's expanded garden. Parker stood on the porch, watching as Charlotte and Emma planted the last of the season's seeds. 6 months of marriage had brought changes he could never have anticipated. The ranch was prospering under their combined efforts, Charlotte's head for business complementing Parker's knowledge of the land. Emma was excelling in school, her natural intelligence nurtured by Charlotte's patient teaching. And there was one more change, one that filled Parker with equal measures of joy and apprehension. Charlotte straightened from her gardening task, one hand moving unconsciously to rest on the slight swell of her belly beneath her apron. 4 months along now, the doctor had confirmed, with the baby due in late summer. When Charlotte had first told him the news, Parker had been overwhelmed with emotion, happiness, yes, but also fear. The memory of Catherine's pregnancy with Emma had surfaced, along with the knowledge that childbirth in these frontier lands was still perilous. But Charlotte's calm confidence had steadied him, as it so often did. "Papa," Emma called, waving him over, "come see what we planted." Parker joined them in the garden, smiling at his daughter's enthusiasm. "What treasure are you growing now? Strawberries?" Emma announced proudly. "Charlotte says they'll be ready to pick in June. If the deer don't get them first," Charlotte added, brushing soil from her hands. Parker helped her to her feet, his hand lingering protectively at her waist. "How are you feeling?" Charlotte rolled her eyes good-naturedly at his constant concern. "Perfectly fine. This baby is as sturdy as its father." Emma looked up at them. "When will the baby be big enough to play with me?" "Not for quite a while," Charlotte told her with a laugh. "First it has to be born, then learn to sit up, then crawl, then walk." "That takes forever," Emma complained. "It goes faster than you think," Parker assured her, remembering how quickly she herself had grown from helpless infant to the spirited girl before him. As they walked back to the house together, Parker marveled at how naturally they had become a family, Charlotte slipping into their lives as if she had always been meant to be there. There were still moments of sadness, still days when he caught Emma looking at Catherine's portrait with wistful eyes, still times when he found Charlotte carefully preserving some memento of Catherine's for Emma's future. But these moments existed alongside their new happiness, neither diminishing the other. That evening, after Emma was asleep, Parker found Charlotte on the porch, gazing at the stars. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and sat beside her on the bench he'd built last fall. "I had a letter from George Wilson today," Charlotte said, leaning against him. "The mercantile's doing well under his management," Parker nodded. The arrangement had been Charlotte's idea, using some of her savings from the sale of her Illinois store to buy into George's business, as a silent partner. The investment provided additional income for their growing family and kept Charlotte connected to the business world she'd known. "He mentioned there's talk of the railroad coming through Riversbend next year," she continued. "It would change everything for the town, for us too." "Easier to get our cattle to market," Parker agreed. "Might be time to expand the herd." Charlotte smiled, recognizing his entrepreneurial tone. Since their marriage, Parker had begun to think beyond mere survival, to build something lasting for their children, Emma and the baby soon to join them. "What shall we name the baby?" Charlotte asked, her hand finding his under the blanket. Parker considered. "If it's a boy, perhaps William, after your father," Charlotte nodded, "and if it's a girl—" They both knew what name remained unspoken between them. Parker took a deep breath. "Catherine," he said softly. "If it's a girl, I'd like to name her Catherine." Charlotte's eyes shimmered in the starlight. "Are you certain?" "Yes," Parker said firmly. "Emma would like it, I think, and it feels right." Charlotte's arms went around him, her head nestled against his chest. "Catherine Jane Reed," she murmured. "It's beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence, the vast Montana night surrounding them. Parker thought about the journey that had brought them here, the grief that had nearly broken him, the letter that had brought Charlotte into their lives, the healing that had followed. "Do you ever wonder," he asked hesitantly, "if Catherine somehow knew, not just about us needing you, but about us?" Charlotte considered the question. "I believe she knew we would be good for each other," she said carefully. "Whether she foresaw exactly how things would unfold, I can't say. But Catherine always had a way of understanding people's hearts, sometimes better than they understood themselves." Parker nodded, remembering his late wife's intuition, her ability to see beneath the surface to what truly mattered. "I think she would be happy," Charlotte continued. Not because we've forgotten her, but because we've remembered her in the best way possible by living fully, by loving Emma, by creating something beautiful from what she left behind. Parker tightened his arm around her shoulders. You're a wise woman, Charlotte Reed. I had a good teacher, she replied, and they both knew she meant Catherine. The baby kicked then, a flutter beneath Charlotte's apron that Parker felt against his side. They both laughed, the moment of solemnity broken by this reminder of the future unfolding within her. Come to bed, Parker said, helping her to her feet. Dr. Miller said you need your rest. Charlotte allowed herself to be led inside, though she protested, I'm pregnant, not invalid. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. And husbands have been worrying about them for just as long, Parker countered, earning a smile from his wife. As they prepared for bed in the cabin that had witnessed so much of their story, grief and healing, endings and beginnings, Parker felt a profound sense of gratitude. For Catherine's foresight, for Charlotte's courage, for Emma's resilience, for this second chance at happiness he had never expected, life in the Montana Territory was never easy. There would be challenges ahead, harsh winters, uncertain markets, the constant work of the ranch. The baby would bring new joys and worries. Emma would grow up, facing her own trials and triumphs, but they would face it all together, this family forged through love and loss, stronger for having been broken and mended. And somewhere, Parker liked to think, Catherine was watching over them all, pleased with how her final act of love had healed not just her family, but the childhood friend who had become so much more. What are you thinking about? Charlotte asked sleepily as they settled into bed. Parker kissed her gently. The future, our future, Charlotte smiled, her hand finding his in the darkness. It's bright, isn't it? Brighter than I ever thought possible, Parker agreed, and held her close as they drifted into sleep beneath the vast Montana sky. In late August, when the prairies were golden with ripening grain and the first hints of autumn touched the cottonwood leaves, Catherine Jane Reed came into the world with a lusty cry that announced her presence to everyone at the Bar R. Doc Miller, who had ridden out from town at Parker's urgent summons, pronounced her as healthy a girl as I've ever delivered before leaving the new parents to marvel over their daughter, Emma, who had waited anxiously with Mrs. Thornton during the birth tiptoed into the bedroom with wide, wondering eyes. She's so small, she whispered, peering at the bundle in Charlotte's arms. You were this small once too, Parker told her, lifting her onto the bed beside Charlotte. Can I hold her? Emma asked. Charlotte carefully transferred the newborn to Emma's waiting arms, showing her how to support the baby's head. Meet your sister, Catherine. Emma studied the tiny face with solemn concentration. Hello, Catherine, I'm your big sister. I'm going to teach you everything. She looked up at Parker and Charlotte. Does she have a nickname? Catherine is awful long for such a tiny baby. Parker and Charlotte exchanged a glance. They hadn't discussed this. What do you think she should be called? Charlotte asked Emma. Emma considered this important question carefully. Kathy, she decided. Or maybe Katie. Katie, Parker repeated, testing the name. I like it. Katie it is then, Charlotte agreed, smiling at the tableau before her Emma cradling the baby, Parker's protective presence beside them both. As autumn deepened into winter, the Bar R settled into a new rhythm. Parker had hired 2 hands to help with the ranch work, allowing him more time with his growing family. The railroad surveyors had indeed come through Riverspend, confirming that tracks would be laid the following year, bringing new opportunities and connections to the outside world. Charlotte recovered quickly from the birth, dividing her time between caring for Katie, helping Emma with her studies, and keeping the ranch accounts in meticulous order. Her partnership with George Wilson's Mercantile was proving profitable, and she had begun discussing the possibility of opening a small dressmaking shop in town once Katie was a bit older. Life wasn't without its challenges. A particularly harsh January blizzard had trapped them in the cabin for nearly a week, and a bout of croup had frightened them all when it left little Katie struggling for breath one terrifying night. But they faced each obstacle together, their bonds strengthening with each trial overcome. On a crisp April morning, as the world awakened from winter's grip, Parker found Charlotte at Catherine's grave. She had brought the first wildflowers of spring, arranging them carefully at the base of the wooden cross. Katie was bundled against her chest in a sling, sleeping peacefully. Parker approached quietly, not wanting to intrude on the moment. Charlotte sensed his presence nonetheless, turning to offer him a gentle smile. "I was telling Catherine about her namesake," she explained, "about how Katie has her eyes." Parker knelt beside her, brushing a fallen leaf from the grave marker. "She would have loved her." "She does love her," Charlotte corrected softly, "just from somewhere else." Parker nodded, accepting this truth that had become part of their family's understanding. Catherine's presence remained not as a ghost or a shadow, but as a foundation upon which their new happiness had been built. "Emma's waiting at the house," Parker said after a moment. "She's made breakfast all by herself and is very proud." Charlotte laughed. "Heaven help us." "Last time she tried to make biscuits, they were hard enough to use as horseshoes." "She's improving," Parker defended, helping Charlotte to her feet. "These are only firm enough to build a cabin with." As they walked back toward the house, Katie stirred against Charlotte's chest, her tiny fists waving in the morning air. Parker touched her downy head, marveling as always at the miracle of her existence. "I've been thinking," he said as they approached the cabin where smoke curled invitingly from the chimney. "About the future." Charlotte glanced at him, recognizing his thoughtful tone. "What about it? The railroad's coming, town's growing, our family's growing." Parker gestured to the land around them. "Maybe it's time the bar grew too." "What are you proposing?" Charlotte asked, intrigued. "The Carson place next door has been abandoned since old man Carson died last fall. His children back east are looking to sell." Parker had been considering this for months but wanted Charlotte's opinion. "It would double our grazing land, give us access to the creek year-round." Charlotte nodded slowly, her business mind clearly working through the possibilities. "It would be a significant investment." "It would," Parker agreed. "But with the railroad coming, cattle prices are bound to rise, and—" he hesitated. "I've been thinking about the future, Emma's future, Katie's, maybe even other children someday." Charlotte's eyes softened. "A legacy." "Something like that," Parker admitted. "Something lasting." Charlotte shifted Katie to her other arm, considering. "We would need to hire more hands, expand the herd gradually, perhaps add sheep as well. There's good money in wool." Parker smiled, recognizing Charlotte's methodical approach. She had brought not just love to their home, but a practical wisdom that complemented his own vision for the ranch. "So you think it's a good idea?" he asked. Charlotte reached for his hand. "I think it's a wonderful idea, building something together for our family's future." She glanced back toward Catherine's grave on the hill. "For all of our family." Parker squeezed her hand, understanding her meaning perfectly. Everything they built would honor what came before. Even as they moved forward, Emma appeared on the porch, waving impatiently. "Breakfast is getting cold." "And I used all the eggs." Parker and Charlotte exchanged an amused glance. "We'd better hurry," Charlotte said, "before she decides to cook lunch too." As they approached the house, Parker took in the scene before him, Emma on the porch, pride evident in her stance despite the flour dusting her apron. Katie stirring against Charlotte's chest, beginning to fuss for her morning feeding. Charlotte herself, her eyes bright with love and purpose as she mounted the steps. This was his family, his home, his life rebuilt from ashes. The path that had led here was marked by both sorrow and joy, by endings and beginnings so intertwined they could no longer be separated. Parker Reed, once broken by grief, now stood whole again, different than before, shaped by loss but not defined by it. The cowboy who had lost his wife had found not a replacement for what was gone, but a new chapter, a continuation of the story that had seemed finished. And as he joined his family in the warm kitchen, accepting Emma's questionable biscuits with appropriate enthusiasm, watching Charlotte settle into a chair to feed Katie, Parker knew with absolute certainty that Catherine had given them all one final, precious gift. The courage to love again, to build again, to live fully in the face of life's impermanence. It was a gift he would honor every day, with every moment of this second chance he had never expected but now cherished beyond measure. Outside, spring continued its ancient renewal across the Montana land, promising growth, change, and the endless possibility of beginning again.